Hello everyone and welcome to the VAIR community. My name is Manish and in this video we are going to take a look at the top 10 topics for group discussion for 2024. As the GD session has begun for all the MBA colleges, these are the top 10 topics for GD according to us. First is the Uniform Civil Code. And all these topics are such that can have really polarizing opinions. So we will see how you can answer these questions. First is the Uniform Civil Code. A Uniform Civil Code is a law which has, or let's say a code. A code means that contains the provisions regarding a particular subject, like all the provisions regarding a particular subject. So when we say civil code, we mean the provisions relating to civil law regarding all the communities, whether it is the Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, Christians, all of them. Right now, one of the major sophistications, or let us say complexities in the Indian legal system, is that different religions have different laws for their civil unions or for their civil matters. For example, matters like marriage, divorce, right? Matters like marriage, divorce, maintenance, adoption, inheritance, etc. The laws are different as far as different religions are concerned. So this creates a lot of problems because there are certain laws which allow certain things that go against the fundamental rights enshrined in the Indian Constitution. And it is the Indian Constitution that is the touchstone of all the fundamental rights. So how can we allow such exceptions to go, or let us say to keep going, which are violative of fundamental rights in the Constitution? For example, among Muslims, there was this provision of talaq-e-bidat or instant triple talaq. So it was violative of Article 14 of the Constitution, that is right to equality, which includes right to equality for men as well as women. Whereas under the talaq-e-bidat, it were only the men who were allowed to grant divorce to women and not a vice versa. So it had to be declared invalid by passing a separate law by the parliament. If we had a uniform civil code, this provision could have been done away with in a single strike. Similarly, there was a provision among the Hindu Succession Act, in the Hindu Succession Act that used to exist, that a married daughter lost right in her father's property. But this provision was wrong because it perpetrated the problem of patriarchy, that only the sons can inherit their father's property and not the daughters. So in 2005, there was an amendment that was moved into the Hindu Succession Act, and married daughters were also granted the right to equal share in their father's property, even after marriage. So these kind of disparities are there which violate one or the other provisions of the fundamental rights enshrined in the Indian Constitution. To make all of these provisions, to iron out all these differences in one go, Uniform Civil Code is something that is warranted. So that is why the founders of our Constitution had put this provision under Article 44 of the Indian Constitution, which right now is not enforced, but it was a directive to the state that in the future, whenever the time seems right, this provision should be made applicable. Now, there have been a lot of discussions about Uniform Civil Code, but there is a lot of misconception among people about the Uniform Civil Code. For example, many minorities in India believe that if this code becomes a reality, their religion and religious practices will be in danger. But that is not the case, because it is only the provisions which are patently illegal as per the Constitution will be struck down. All other essential religious practices, customs, traditions will still be there. The Hindus will still have seven feras. The Muslims can still have the nikah. The Sikhs can still have their Anand Karaj. All the traditions will be protected. It is just that the practices derogatory to women, the practices which go against the fundamental rights will be struck down. So now the question that whether the time for this reform has come. Now on that question, I would say that the time will never be right because it has already been 75 years since we implemented the Indian Constitution, since we became independent. So I think the time has come for this progressive reform to become a reality. People should be informed well enough so that they can make informed choices, so that they are not misled by vested interests, by some political parties who want to galvanize opinion against such a iconic reform. And this thing should be kept in mind that it is the Constituent Assembly of India which kept this provision in the Constitution of India because they thought it was really progressive. But they acknowledged the fact that in 1950, India was not that progressive that it could accept this code. But perhaps 75 years down the line, we have become that much mature and that much open minded that we can consider this kind of a reform, and we can keep the Constitution of India at the highest pedestal. Then the second topic is caste census. So, caste census, almost all the political parties are talking about it. Now, caste census simply means that just like we have a census, which is a collection of demographic data regarding India, which collects so many metrics like sex ratio, literacy rate, urban and rural population, density of population, and all that. Caste census is specifically a census of backward castes, backward classes, scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, and all others. Now, the reason why caste census is being promoted by most of the political parties is that there is a demand amongst certain backward classes that they be given sub quotas within the quotas. That is, there should be sub categorization of castes. And the reason for that is that there are some castes within scheduled castes which are getting overwhelming representation in the SC quota, in jobs as well as in educational institutions. Whereas there are an overwhelming number of castes within the scheduled castes which are not getting those benefits. So they who are not getting those benefits are demanding that SC quota as well as ST quota as well as the OBC quota should be subcategorized and their caste should be given some specific representation. Now this will open a Pandora's box because there are thousands of scheduled castes and thousands of OBCs in India who will be then demanding subcategorization. But that will make the task meaningless. For example, if there are 100 vacancies advertised by a government and the SC quota is, let us say, 15%. So if 15% seats are reserved for the SC quota, that means 15 out of 100 seats are reserved for them. But if we say that those 15% need to be subcategorized into, let us say, 100 castes, then every caste will end up getting, less than 1% of the reservation. Perhaps 0.1%, 0.2%. But then that will defeat the purpose. If there are a total of 15 vacancies, how can we possibly, like categorize or subcategorize this category into such small proportions that it will become meaningless? It can be spread across a long period of time. Let us say if a community is getting 0.5% reservation, that means it will get that reservation for one seat in this year, but maybe not next year. That can be done, but then the purpose of this reservation will become almost meaningless. So we cannot have that kind of fragmentation of within a quota. However, still most of the political parties are demanding caste census or are promising caste census because it has political dividends. There are so many, there's an overwhelming majority of Indians who are SCs or STs or OBCs, and it is a ploy to get more and more votes. But in the long term, this has a dangerous precedent of ghettoization, it had a strong precedent of fragmentation within various castes. So, this is perhaps something that the British had done, dividing people on the basis of castes and religions, and now we are trying to do it even more, which can be a dangerous thing to do. Rather, the government should come out with a formula that how those who are less represented within a particular caste can be given more representation without fragmenting the already fragmented quota system. That is something that you can recommend. So it should not be done for political purpose. It should not be done for ulterior motives. It should be done with the actual motive of giving some meaning to this census and to increase representation of all the communities within a particular category. Then there is a topic of 70-hour work week. So Infosys co-founder Mr. N. Narayan Murthy suggested that all the young Indians should work 70 hours a week. So this has stirred a lot of debate in the corporate circles and in all the among all the intelligentsia. And rightly so, because this is like trying to find a balance between a hustle life as well as or on the other hand, let us say a very easygoing life. Now, there is no one answer to this. But if you want to have a balanced opinion, you can say that what Mr. Narayan Murthy said should not be taken in a negative light. What he was actually suggesting was that those who are in the early years of their career, in order to fast track their progress, in order to learn more and more, and in order to allow the compounding in the knowledge compounding and the experience compounding to work later on in their careers, the youngsters, the novices, the you can say those who are getting started in a particular professional career, they should not shy away from putting in their best, from putting in all that they have. That is what he meant by 70-hour work week. So it does not mean that if you have, let us say, 10 or 20 years of experience, you still go on 70 hours of work, 70 hours a week. That is not what he suggested, and that is not how it should be interpreted. But then again, someone may ask that is 70-hour work week feasible for a novice or for a person who is just getting started in his or her career? Again, then it's a personal choice. It's not something that by law can be permitted, or it is not something that companies can force upon their employees. So if someone is doing it out of their own volition, it's perfectly fine, but it should not be forced upon the people. But if it, of course, the debate of course shows that people in various job profiles in various corporate sector jobs are actually putting in that much and perhaps even more. That is a cause for concern if we are doing it at a, or let's say over a long period of time. So is 70-hour work week fine? Perhaps it's a personal choice and perhaps at the start of your career to give you a head start, but not always, not in all the sectors, and not forcefully. It should be voluntary, it should be for a short period of time, and its intent should not be missed. That if you put in this much work in the initial years of your career, you're going to enjoy a really skilled and compounded growth in the later years of your career. That is what he meant by it. Next, Israel-Palestine issue and India's response. So this is one of the most contentious issues around the world. The reason for that is that, like, I'm not going into details about the Israel-Palestine issue. If you want to take a look at that, there's a detailed video on it already. You can go watch that. But if I tell you how to cultivate an opinion on it, so this is one of those issues that is a complex interplay of geopolitics, territory, as well as regional influence and religion as well. So religion, territory, as well as geopolitics. And all these three are quite emotive issues. Even one of them has the potential to make an issue a really big one. But this particular conflict has all the three. That's why it is one of the most deadly conflicts in the world. And recently it reared its ugly head yet again when this war started in October. Now, India's response has always been that if there is a problem between any two countries, they should always try to solve it bilaterally. Other than that, it is the UN Security Council where these topics can be discussed and then solved. But of course, the Security Council has proven to be absolutely ineffective because of the veto mechanism, where if there is a resolution against Israel, it is the US or UK that vetoes it. And if there is a resolution against the other country, then perhaps it is China or Russia that vetoes it. Now, as far as India's response is concerned, India traditionally had always been pro Palestine. But over a period of time, we have seen the growing support of Israel as well as by Israel for India. And due to that, our current policy stance is that we enjoy really good relations with both Israel as well as the Palestine Liberation Organization. However, we have always advocated, as Prime Minister Narendra Modi said last year in context of the Russia-Ukraine war, that, and I quote, "This is not the era of war." Now, if that is the case, so that applies to Israel-Palestine issue as well. So India's foreign policy stance is the same here as well, that we do not advocate war, we do not advocate human rights violations, and since almost 30,000 people have died in the conflict till now, a majority of whom are civilians, India strongly recommends both the parties to enter into a dialogue, and India has even offered to mediate between both the parties. So India's response has been that this issue should be resolved amicably in a swift manner, and if India's help is required, we are always there. But this is not the era of war, and human rights violations are non-negotiable. So this war should come to an end as soon as possible. Next issue is global trade disruptions in India. Now, related to the Israel-Palestine conflict is the global trade disruption. There are certain rebel groups, and one of them is the Houthi rebel group. The Houthi rebel group in Yemen. Now, this rebel group is pro-Palestine and anti-Israel, and they started attacking ships to and from Israel near the Red Sea. Now, Red Sea is the entrance to the Suez Canal, which is one of the most crucial links in global maritime trade. So Suez Canal connects Mediterranean Sea to the Red Sea, and that gives a shortcut to the ships or cargo containers coming from South Asia, Southeast Asia, East Asia towards Northern Africa, Europe, West Asia, and even Western Europe. Now, since a considerable portion of the world trade passes through Suez Canal, these attacks on the ships near the Red Sea prompted a lot of countries to issue statements, including India. So, global trade disruptions in India means that is this kind of disruption feasible? Well, of course not. But what should we do to stop it? So there have been global mechanisms, there have been global initiatives to stop such disruptions, but we haven't seen any such disruption in a long time. Since this has reared its ugly head yet again, we need to take a look at the provisions that are there in the international law. And until then, we should try to strengthen the already existing framework on how we can tackle such things. The piracy as well as the attacks by these rebel groups. Now, just because they happen to be geographically privileged to be situated in those positions where they do not have any moral right to stop the world trade, which is the lifeline of global economy. And not to forget, the global economy is already in a state of recession. So in such times, if the global trade disruptions are there, countless number of people may lose their jobs, may get into unemployment, into poverty, all those vicious cycles. So considering the global good and the good of the people around the world, the countries should collectively come together and take steps to stop these disruptions. Then the India Maldives diplomatic standoff. So recently, Prime Minister Modi visited Lakshadweep, and his photographs were doing the round on the internet. So many citizens of India started questioning why Indians go to Maldives when we have such a scenic beauty in Lakshadweep itself. Going where we do not require any passport even. Now that prompted a lot of hate from Maldives, whose recently elected president, Mr. Mohammad Moitzu, is a Chinese sympathizer. So he's an anti-India, you can say he's an anti-India lobbyist and a pro-China lobbyist. So he has become the president of Maldives on an India out campaign. Hashtag India Out was the campaign running on which he became the president of Maldives, because there's a very small minority of people in Maldives who consider that India has tried to play a big brotherly role in Maldives, or maybe is trying to dominate Maldives. But of course, there's nothing like that. Quite the opposite is actually true, that China is trying to encapsulate the Maldives. Anyway, since Mr. Moitsu is a pro China person, he has started taking anti India steps. So his three of his ministers tweeted against the Prime Minister of India, Mr. Modi, really demeaning and derogatory tweets, which they later deleted. And the president, Mr. Moitzu, actually laid off all those three ministers, suspended all those three ministers. But it was not enough. The diplomatic ties had already started sliding down. Now, in such a scenario, if you are asked what should be India's stance on this issue, of course, India's stance in general foreign policy matters is that we always reciprocate what the other country is doing to us. But when it comes to neighboring countries, we have to keep in mind two or three policies. One is neighborhood first policy. Neighborhood first policy. So we have always helped our neighbors, because in foreign policy you cannot change your neighbors. So it's better that you learn to live with them. So neighborhood first policy tells us that today it is Mr. Mohammad Moitzu, tomorrow it may not be Mohammad Moitzu. So we should not do something that is irreparable in the future. So we have not taken any provocative steps against Myanmar. It's against Maldives. It is already too small a country to be retaliated against. So our foreign policy stance is that we still consider it as neighborhood first, and Gujral doctrine also needs to be invoked here. Mr. I.K. Gujral was the former Prime Minister of India, and he had this philosophy that since we cannot change our neighbors, we should not expect anything from them in return. We may do good to them, but we should not expect the same in return. Now, it does not mean that we do not have a red line. We do have a red line that we have drawn, and Pakistan has breached it time and again. And that red line is national security interests. So if another country starts attacking us, starts conducting terrorist strikes or something like that, then of course we will retaliate like no other. But other than that, we always give more than what we receive from these countries. For example, during COVID-19, we distributed free of cost COVID vaccines under the Vaccine Maitri initiative. Similarly, whenever there is a natural disaster and disaster relief is required in any of these countries, India sends its armed forces without any hesitation. The same happened in Maldives as well. When the 2004 tsunami, Maldives was also flooded. India sent its forces there. Similarly, a few years before, there was a massive water supply shortage in Maldives. So India had launched Operation Neer. Neer means water, to provide fresh drinking water to all the people in Myanmar, in Maldives, sorry. So I think we should continue with the neighborhood first approach as well as the Gujarat doctrine. We should not expect anything from Maldives in return. But of course, the red line should always be there. It does not mean that if Maldives tries to, breach the red line, we do not do anything. We should, right? But until then, I think We should take it in our stride that for the next few years, the Maldivian government is not going to be sympathetic to us. They are going to be pro China. We should learn to live with that fact. Next, the Women's Reservation Act that has been passed in the Indian Parliament. It has been passed in both the houses, Lok Sabha as well as Rajya Sabha, but it shall be implemented after 2026 because there are certain provisions that require a new delimitation, a new census, and both the exercises shall be done after 2026. That means we will have to wait till after the Lok Sabha elections until it actually implements. However, if we talk about the provisions of the law in general, it says that one third of the seats in the state legislatures as well as in the parliament shall be reserved for women. So that's a really commendable step because right now women constitutes around 10 to 12% of India's parliament. Taking it directly to 33% can change a lot for Indian women in a positive sense. And we have a case study for this. In 1992, the 73rd and 74th Constitutional Amendment Acts were passed by the Parliament of India, giving legal rights or constitutional rights to the panchayats and municipalities. Now, in that, there was a provision for one third reservation for women. And that is the reason, out of the lakhs of panchs, sarpanch, and municipal councillors in various cities and villages of India, one third are women. And it has played a role in making them leaders, in, taking this thing at a grassroots level, ensuring women representation. And the same can now be done for MLAs and MPs as well. So it's a progressive step, but much depends upon the political will of the upcoming government. India and G20. So G20, that is the group of 20, has had its summit in New Delhi in September last year. Now, this, on the positive side, showcased India's growing influence at the global stage. Then we were able to take a few measures at G20 that made it a really, really memorable summit. For example, the inclusion of African Union into it, the launch of India, Middle East, Europe corridor, the launch of Global Biofuels Alliance. These are some of the things that India has done. So, by successfully hosting this huge conference, India has shown its credibility to the world. And now we have decided to make a bid for the 2036 Olympics and also a bid for the UN Security Council permanent sheet. So this gives India the confidence which was needed a lot. And it shows the increasing recognition of India's growth among the major global powers, whether it is the fact that India is going to become the third largest economy in the next 2 to 3 years, or whether it's the fact that we are the world's fastest growing large economy. We are now the world's most populous country. We have a rules based order. We have democracy. We have a really stable government. All those things which are missing in so many other countries of this region. So, India proved its mettle at the global stage by hosting G20 successfully. And this summit will go down in history as one of the most successful and inclusive summits, and the credit for including African Union, which is a 55-member grouping of all the African countries, will also go to the Indian establishment. Then Ram Temple and cultural renaissance. So recently, the Ram Temple in Ayodhya was inaugurated by the Prime Minister. Although it is very unlikely that a topic like this can be asked in the group discussion, but the reason I have included it here is, if not the political angle, but the cultural angle of it be asked in the GD, what should you say? You should primarily try to say that any country which goes away from its roots in terms of culture cannot become a superpower. If you want to become a superpower, if you actually want to have that kind of soft power that countries like, let us say, USA has, one needs to focus on their past, one needs to focus on their traditions, what they already have. Like, for example, India's one of the biggest soft powers of India at the global level is yoga. And for that, we did not go to the Western world. We explored ourselves, our own culture, our own history, and we took out some really important things which are now becoming a global phenomenon. The same thing can be done with the Ram Temple as well. We can showcase it as a part of our culture, and already there are millions of tourists visiting this temple, which have the potential not only to make us a big soft power around the world, but also to showcase to the world India's soft power, just like we have done with yoga. So, of course, there will be millions of foreign tourists who will come visit this temple. So, yes, it does stand for India's cultural re-emergence, which is much needed because we are on the path to becoming a developed country as well as the world's top three economies. Then we have COP28 and climate emergency. So this meeting was held in Dubai, which is the world's largest meeting or largest annual meeting hosted by Dubai. So it is the 28th meeting or COP to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC. And under this, the last major agreement was the Paris Agreement of 2015. The target for the whole world is to contain the global average temperature rise to well below 2 degrees Celsius and preferably 1.5 degrees Celsius. Right? So to fulfill that, these countries, these parties meet every year. India is also a party. So now on this meeting, there was one thing which was always controversial because UAE is a oils based economy. So on the one hand, we are talking about phasing out crude oil, natural gas, coal, etc. And on the other hand, we are granting the hosting rights to a country whose overwhelming majority of GDP comes from crude oil. So that was always a concern. In fact, the summit president Sultan Al Jaber is also the head of Abu Dhabi National Oil Company or ADNOC, and recently declared that he would double oil and gas output this decade. So it does not inspire confidence if a country who thrives on fossil fuels hosts a climate change conference where the main agenda is how to phase out the fossil fuels. So Sultan Al Jaber also came under a lot of criticism because of the same reason. Right? So COP28 and climate change emergency, it means on this meeting it was decided that the climate change has actually become an emergency. Now, if you have to answer from India's perspective, India is largely fulfilling its commitments, that is the intended nationally determined contributions that India agreed to in 2015 and were updated in 2021 at Glasgow in Scotland. So India is trying to fulfill as much of its commitments as possible and is one of the best performers on the climate change performance index. So that is something that you're going to say. That is all. These are the most important hot topics that I think you should know about. You should have an opinion about them. If you have any doubt, you can mention in the comment section, and you can also learn about those topics through our other videos. That's all for this. Thank you so much and take care.